Welcome back, everyone. I'm Nicole Gerard, and this is the Vertical Mindset Podcast. Building trust in any type of relationship takes time, transparency, mutual respect, and understanding. Today's episode focuses on how to build trust in our working relationships and what it can look like when we disclose an appropriate amount of information to the right people at the right time.
Hi, I'm Sasja with Dynamic Achievement, and I'm here today with my colleague, Andrew Lindsay from Dynamic Achievement. And in this ongoing series of podcasts and topics that we've been exploring, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today was building trust in relationships. And what are some of the key ingredients? Because we've talked in previous podcasts about how trust is so foundational to creating any kind of sense of tribe, of any sense of team in order to be successful and to have the culture we want and the results we want. So that being said, what I really want to start exploring now is, so how do we actually build trust? And what are some of the best ways, in your opinion, to be able to do that?
Right. Sasha, I think the question will require talking about multiple things.
Oh, sure. I don't expect to have it all wrapped up in 10 minutes, but at least get going.
Today we're going to focus on two only, and they are the skills of disclosure and conceding.
Okay. All right, so say more about that.
Yeah. So we're two separate people. I've got my world, my upbringing, my beliefs, the thoughts that are going through my head. I've got all my drivers and my fears and my own worries in life, and you have yours, and we're two separate people.
Yeah.
To build trust between us, well, hopefully to build trust, unless I disclose something inappropriate.
Right.
To build trust between us, you need to know me. I need to become predictable to you. You need to know where I stand on things,
right,
how I think about things, how I feel about things.
And even where I stand with you, I would imagine.
I need to know that. And you want to know that.
Yeah.
And I need to know about those same things about you. So if we think about what's going on in my head, I've got concerns. I've got hopes. I've got certain needs and wants that I want met. I've got fears. I've got values. I've got a whole belief system. I make certain assumptions. I have certain perceptions.
Yeah.
All this stuff's going on in my head and in my heart. In organizations, it's very, very important that we have that level of trust with one another so that I'm predictable and you're predictable. So I need to practice the skill called disclosure.
Okay.
Which means I need to be able to be appropriately open with you and transparent with you about all the stuff that's going on in my head, my life, my perceptions and my opinions. And I say appropriate because I think it's appropriate that you know about my family, aspects of my life outside of work, because that's about the relationship that we have in the workplace where we spend 8 to 10 hours a day. So I believe that level of disclosure is required. And if I don't display that skill of disclosure with you, appropriate disclosure, I want to stress, because it's not appropriate, some stuff's not appropriate to share. If I don't display that level of disclosure about you, you don't know me. And therefore you don't know whether you can trust me or not. And 9 times out of 10, if you don't know whether you can trust me or not, you'd be a lot safer for your survival to have a negative perception of me.
Right, and to just assume suspicion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you think back to our ancestors again, their survival didn't come because they trusted the guy from over the hill there.
Right.
No, that guy from over the hill was going to steal their wife, their children and their cattle. So I'm much safer off mistrusting you than trusting you.
Yeah.
So through disclosure, you'll get to know me. Hopefully the kind of information that can build trust between us. But then something really interesting kicks in, and this is really important, and it's called the law of reciprocity.
Okay.
The law of reciprocity says that if I disclose a certain amount about me to you, it gives you the confidence and the almost social obligation to display the same level of disclosure with me. So by me sharing with you, you'll automatically share about the same amount with me, as long as it can fit within your value system and your personality. Some people don't want anything about them to be known at work, about their private life, etc. But by the law of reciprocity, the more you know about me, my background, my family, my beliefs, my thoughts, my feelings, my needs, my wants, the more you're going to disclose those to me, and you and I are going to be able to establish a trust-based relationship, which is foundational to our ability to do business together.
Yeah. Which, again, it makes so much sense, right? In terms of being able to display enough transparency, vulnerability to some degree. The question that pops up in my mind, again, is to come back to the word you used, appropriately.
Yeah.
And this question of for judgment for each of us as individuals of how do I come to this place of judgment of what level is appropriate or not appropriate to share. And I'm going to assume there's a whole spectrum within that response. But any thoughts or advice around how do I make a decision of what's appropriate to disclose or not disclose with any particular individual?
I wish there was a rule. There is not.
No.
I think it depends on our working relationship within the business, the length of time we've known one another, if there are positional power gaps within the business, gender differences. Those could all be variables that we need to take into account. Also, me knowing your personality and whether this would be appropriate for you to know about me. I'm thinking of one particular situation where a manager on an ongoing basis disclosed to his staff about the state of his marriage. And for some people that had this level of detail, they found it very comforting, because by the law of reciprocity, if he was displaying that level of vulnerability and humility, that his life wasn't perfect, they would be willing to display their own level of vulnerability.
Right.
And some people really appreciated it, and they found it built incredible trust. Whereas other people within the team felt that there was over-disclosure. They didn't want to know that amount of information. So you've really got to be careful that you disclose. There's not a rule on what you disclose and don't disclose. It's what you disclose to whom and when.
Got it. Yeah.
I might disclose something prematurely in my relationship with you, and that would be inappropriate. But in a year's time, it might be appropriate.
Yeah. Makes total sense. So it's an interesting dance for people to sort that one out. At the same time, so you also mentioned like being able to disclose, my thoughts, my perceptions, my stories. I'm curious about feelings, because this is always an interesting one for me when I work with clients around people disclosing, also being clear about how are they feeling about something, whether it's anxious or disappointed or scared or excited, whatever that is. And not all the time, but often enough, I get that pushback of, we're not here to talk about feelings, or I don't want to talk about feelings, and we're here to talk about the business. Right. And yet I personally believe this is such a critical piece. And, so for you and in your work with clients, what do you see in terms of the importance of, do I need to be disclosing my feelings? Again, to what degree is that appropriate? Just some thoughts on that.
Okay. Let's go back to the neuroscience of this and think about the brain. And I know I like my little picture of my triune brain, starting with my reptilian brain on the inside and the limbic brain and the prefrontal cortex. I know it's not anatomically correct, but if we think about the brain working from the inside out, where my survival instincts, my basic survival instincts come first and foremost. I've got to survive, otherwise I'm of no use to anyone. But then my clan comes second, my tribe comes second, and third is my ability of my prefrontal cortex to work. If you and I have emotional issues, or I've got emotional stuff, and I don't disclose that to you, which is more foundational to our thinking brains, I don't believe you and I can have a full relationship.
Right.
I've heard a leader, not firsthand, this was a second-hand thing, say to the executive team, he was the CEO of a company, when we have meetings, you need to leave your feelings outside the door. And he was very emphatic about that, all feelings outside the door. So if you even mentioned a word, I feel upset, but leave your feelings outside the door, was his response to this. And I don't believe that is possible. Yeah. We are emotional creatures.
Absolutely.
And so I think the appropriate level of emotional disclosure is a far greater driver of trust building than if I disclose simply my thoughts or my assumptions.
Yeah.
Now, my thoughts or my assumptions might lead to an emotional reaction in you. Sasha, I'd like to share with you my assumptions about you, and you have an emotional reaction to that. I think it's appropriate for you then to disclose your emotional reaction to my assumption that I made, because now at least we're having a real conversation.
Yeah, and I think my hunch around some of that too is that there's the discomfort and maybe not even the understanding sometimes between disclosing my feeling, which is just sharing with you what's going on for me,
Right.
as opposed to acting it out. Like I don't need
Right.
to like cry or go into hysterics or start yelling in an angry way. That's, to me, that becomes inappropriate, particularly in the workplace. And I think that's where sometimes there's that nervousness of, if we start talking about feelings, I'm going to open this up to all this display of emotion. So again, it gets an interesting dance of how that shows up for people. Now, the other one that you mentioned, Andrew, you mentioned conceding as well. So tell me what that one looks like.
Okay. I'm a human being. I make mistakes. Sometimes I make little mistakes, and sometimes I make big mistakes. I might make a mistake that I'm aware of, and I might make a mistake that I'm actually not aware of. I screwed up.
Yeah.
I believe that the skill of conceding is to take 100% responsibility when you screwed up, whether it's small or big, and be vulnerable and be humble and do it with absolute integrity. Take ownership. And there's two reasons for this. The one is the law of reciprocity, again, just like disclosure. I believe that if I'm willing to concede that I made a mistake, I was wrong, you will also be more willing and more open to disclosure and conceding if you made a mistake. Law of reciprocity. So it will open the door for you not having to be perfect, because I'm not perfect. So that's the aspect of conceding that leads to, again, greater trust, because now we can be open with each other about mistakes that we've made. Again, critical to building trust. And I had just a week ago, I had an example where I was working with an executive team where both disclosure and conceding were shown on this executive team. And if you're okay, let me share this example.
Please.
It was just so beautiful. I actually wrote to them afterwards, and I was going, well, guys, you pulled that off beautifully there. You followed this and explained the law of reciprocity. So I had done a leadership assessment on the full executive team using the 7 pillars so that we could all understand our leadership strengths and leadership growth areas. And the team didn't have a lot of trust between themselves, say 3 or 4 months ago. But through this process of learning and openness and dialogue and dealing with issues, they now got to the point where they were open to having a leadership assessment done in the first place, but then sharing their results with one another. And that takes courage. Because we're all human and we have strengths and we have weaknesses. Well, it started off, who would like to share first? And the most senior person in the room said, I'd like to go first. Which I wasn't expecting. I was in fact expecting somebody else to go. And the senior person started off disclosing that his results were actually not good. And his leadership assessment results were not good. And he said, and he put it on the table like this, I want to let you know that I've had self-confidence issues since I've been a young person. I actually have quite a lot of feelings of self-doubt, fear. I carry around that thing called the imposter syndrome. I don't know that I belong in the role as a CEO. I don't know if I'm worthy of leading you and leading this company. And I've had these self-confidence issues for a long, long time, and they cause me to behave in certain ways. And the CEO then started to explain how this has shown up in sometimes creating defensiveness, sometimes showing up as creating aggression, sometimes being argumentative. By the CEO setting the tone through disclosure of this very personal thing of insecurity and vulnerability and imposter syndrome, as we went around the group, the disclosure just kept increasing because the trust was established, starting with the CEO. It was unbelievably powerful. So, disclosure created reciprocity, where now everyone else was willing to disclose both their strengths and talk about their strengths, because you can talk about positive stuff here.
Absolutely.
They disclosed both their strengths more openly and how their strengths show up on the team, and they disclosed where their growth areas are as leaders, where their growth areas show up on the team, and everyone was going, yeah. And then the exercise went a step further, where it was, we gave one another feedback on how I seen you showing up, because the president had started off with this level of disclosure about himself. People were more willing to say things to others within the group that they'd never ever said before. They'd been bottling this in for years and became quite a dysfunctional team. And as the group went around, there was a certain member of the executive team who, it's known, is the black sheep on the team.
Right.
Not well regarded, a lot of talk behind his back, negative talk. Probably a wish he wasn't on the team. Creating a lot of triangulation on the team. And when it got to his turn to talk about his leadership report, he did the most amazing thing, and he conceded. And he said, my assessment showed some areas of severe weakness, what we call a critical flaw, that in the back of my mind I thought could be there, but I wasn't prepared to deal with. And I want to let you know that I've had a couple of weeks to really process these results, and I am embarrassed, and I am ashamed of myself for how I've been showing up on this team, and this assessment process put it on the table. Again, the law of reciprocity kicked in. And then his team members, who don't really like him up to this point, actually went to his rescue. The law of reciprocity says if I disclose a vulnerability and a weakness because of our limbic brain needing to be part of the tribe and make you feel okay, they actually started lifting them up, whereas before they would have loved to have crushed him down.
Absolutely. But so now I want to support you, and I want to take care.
As long as he was defensive, he used the word, I'm a defensive, I'm aggressive, I'm pedantic, I'm abrasive, and I know that my assessment showed all this, and now I understand why you've alienated me. The more he disclosed and conceded these pretty fatal flaws that he was bringing into the team, the more the team went to rescue him. And when he showed a genuine and humble intent to work on his growth areas, the team started gelling more together. So what we're really saying here is that to build trust, disclosure about me, my thoughts, my feelings, my needs, my wants, my beliefs, my values, my assumptions, my perceptions, my life, and conceding with humility when you make a mistake or show up badly, is both of those skills are foundational to creating trust, and through the law of reciprocity they encourage the same level of openness in others around us.
It's so incredibly powerful. And I know it's only a week in with that particular example, but I can already imagine the transformation and the shift that will start creating in their culture and thus in their business.
That's correct.
And the results that they get.
So instead of operating as each little silo and then starting to triangulate with each other, now they're starting to gel together as one team.
And actually operate as a team.
That's right.
That's great.
And focus on the business instead of what's wrong with you. For me.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Andrew.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Vertical Mindset Podcast. As always, for more information, you can visit us at dynamicachievement.com or reach us at info@dynamicachievement.com, where we would love to hear from you. Until next time, be vertical.